Parents, just a quick note. If you want to turn today's Storytime episode into a homeschooling English language arts lesson, look in the description box below and there will be a link to printable PDF worksheets. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Authorized. I am your hostess, Christina Nicole Smith, and today's Storytime is Unspeakable, the Tulsa Race Massacre, written by Carole Boston Weatherford and illustrated by Floyd Cooper. Now, before I go into this story time, I want to acknowledge that I normally read fiction books for each Storytime video. But today's story is a nonfiction book, which means it's a real story. So this is an event that happened in history. It's a true story. And this is not something that is going to be taught in school. I know I wasn't taught about this historical event in school. And so it's most likely that the children in school, grade school nowadays, it will be the same thing. So the reason why I picked this story is because if one knows what happened in history, then they won't want to repeat it. And so this is why stories are so important to share, because once we know better, we can do better. All right. And so let's begin. Once upon a time near Tulsa, Oklahoma, prospectors struck it rich in the oil fields. The wealth created jobs, raised buildings, and attracted newcomers from far and wide, seeking fortune and a fresh start. Once upon a time in Tulsa, there was a community called Greenwood. Its residents descended from Black Indians, from formerly enslaved people, and from exodusters, that's a big word, who moved west in the late 1800s, fleeing the violence and racism in the segregated South. Once upon a time in Greenwood, there were some 10,000 people living in a 35 square block area. Train tracks divided the black and white communities. Segregation laws called for separate neighborhoods, schools, phone booths, and railroad and streetcar coaches. Unfair tests made it hard for blacks to register to vote, and laws barred marriages across racial lines. So many black businesses cropped up along a 1-mile stretch of Greenwood Avenue that educator and business leader Booker T. Washington called the area the Negro Wall Street of America. The name later became Black Wall Street, and the community kept thriving. Once upon a time on Black Wall Street, there were dozens of restaurants and grocery stores. There were furriers, a pool hall, a bus system, and an auto shop. Nearly 200 businesses in all. There were also several libraries, a hospital, a post office, and a separate school system, where some say black children got a better education than whites. There were 2 black-owned newspapers, the Tulsa Star and Oklahoma Sun, and over 20 churches, and 15 black doctors, including Dr. A.C. Jackson, the most able black surgeon in the nation. On Detroit Avenue stood grand homes of doctors, lawyers, and prominent businessmen. Once upon a time in Greenwood, there were barber shops and beauty salons. Miss Mabel's Little Rose Beauty Salon boomed on Thursdays when maids who worked for white families got coiffed on their day off and strutted in style up and down Greenwood Avenue. The soda fountain at Williams Confectionery was the backdrop for scores of marriage proposals. And then there was the luxurious Stratford Hotel, then the largest Black-owned hotel in the nation. Black guests were welcomed there, even as they were barred from Tulsa's white hotels. Once upon a time in Greenwood, there were 2 movie theaters, including the 800-seat Black-owned Dreamland. There were even 6 privately owned airplanes. But in 1921, not everyone in Tulsa was pleased with these signs of Black wealth. Undeniable proof that African Americans could achieve just as much, if not more, than whites. All it took was one elevator ride. One 17-year-old white elevator operator accusing a 19-year-old Black shoeshine man of assault for simmering hatred to boil over. With the accused man in jail, the white-owned Tulsa Tribune newspaper ran a headline prompting readers to nab him. Fearing the man would be lynched, killed by a mob before his trial, 30 armed Black men rushed downtown to his rescue. At the jail, they faced off with 2,000 armed whites. On May 31st, 1921, one day after Memorial Day, a holiday honoring fallen soldiers, skirmishes between the 2 groups left 2 Black men and 10 white men dead. But the worst was yet to come. Unable to get to the jailed suspect, the white mob sparked rumors that the Black community planned to attack. Unchecked and, in some cases, deputized by the police, the white mob stormed into Greenwood, looting and burning homes and businesses that Blacks had saved and sacrificed to build. Threatening to shoot, the mob blocked firefighters from putting out the blazes. African-American World War I veterans took up arms to defend their families and property, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Families fled with only what they could carry. Once upon a time in Greenwood, up to 300 Black people, including Dr. Jackson, were killed. Hundreds more were injured. More than 8,000 people were left homeless, and hundreds of businesses and other establishments were reduced to ash. The police did nothing to protect the Black community. When the National Guard arrived the next day, all that was left to do was put out fires and move thousands of Black residents into camps outside of Tulsa. As their community lay in ruins, Black residents had to carry passes to enter the city. In the days and weeks that followed, some Black Tulsans left and never returned. Others stayed and rebuilt the Greenwood community, only to witness its decline in the 1960s. For decades, survivors did not speak of the terror. 75 years passed before lawmakers launched an investigation to uncover the painful truth about the worst racial attack in United States history. Police and city officials had plotted with the white mob to destroy the nation's wealthiest Black community. Today, Tulsa's Reconciliation Park remembers victims of the 1921 massacre and recalls the role of African Americans in Oklahoma history. But the park is not just a bronze monument to the past. It is a place to realize the responsibility we all have to reject hatred and violence and to instead choose hope. The end. And now I have some questions, as I always do, but first I have some comments. Some of my comments are that I just want to acknowledge that sometimes historical events can be a mixed bag. It just means that some things are happy and some things are kind of sad or ugly, and we don't want to know or particularly learn about or hear about when people are acting at their worst. And I know for children, it's kind of upsetting to see people acting in such an ugly fashion, because children are always so, generally speaking, children are usually very happy. And so it's troubling to see or hear about events in history such as this, when this was an ugly event. So I'm aware of that. But now let's talk about, or let's move on to those questions, okay? Now, if you had lived back in that time, what do you think that you could have done or you would have done differently so that the outcome at Greenwood could have been different? What do you think you would have done differently had you lived during that time? Let me ask you this. When you see somebody else prospering, are you genuinely happy for that person? And if you aren't happy for that person, why aren't you happy for that person? I know when I was younger, I used to get jealous when somebody had something that I didn't have. That didn't make me very happy. But you know, as I got older, I realized that once I became grateful for what I did have, I was genuinely happy when I saw others prospering, because I knew that I was prospering too. So what do I mean by that? Well, for instance, I was happy that I had my health. I've got my health. I've got my family. My family's got their health. We have a roof over our heads. We have clothes on our back. We have access to clean water. And, just our basic needs are covered. And then once your basic needs are covered, everything else can go from there. So once I realized that, I was genuinely happy when other people were prospering. So that's another side note. But it's good to ask yourself these questions because it leads to emotional intelligence. You want to be happy for others when they're prospering. Let me see, what are some other good questions? Because this is a power-packed story. Well, what about this? What do you think the moral of the story was? Because there's definitely a reason why the author of this story, even though it's a true event, she wanted to share it. Why do you think she wanted to share this with young children, share this story? And I'll just leave it there because I'm kind of going off the top of my head. I always do that. But I don't want to keep going on and on. But I hope that you learned something new today, something that you can take with you and use for the future. Okay? So that's the end of this episode, and I'll see you next time on Authorized.